The big storylines in the 118th Congress has been the seemingly endless feuding among the House Republican majority. Now they're adding fuel to the fire. Sitting Republicans are actively campaigning to take out their own colleagues in primaries, a major breach of protocol, but one that underscores the bad blood within the House GOP conference. Now, in at least 4 primary elections, Republican lawmakers are maneuvering to defeat their own colleagues. And Speaker Johnson has had enough. He told my colleague Melanie Zanona at this past week's GOP retreat that he's told his members to cool it. It's not productive and causes division for obvious reason. But as my new reporting with Melanie reveals, Johnson's warnings haven't changed the tide yet, especially with Florida firebrand Matt Gaetz, who led the charge to oust Kevin McCarthy from the speakership in the fall. Gaetz skipped the retreat this past week and instead flew to Texas to rally with a candidate challenging incumbent Republican Congressman Tony Gonzalez. It's the second primary that Gaetz has tried to meddle with in this past year. My panel is back. So I've talked to, Gaetz is not the only one, which there are several others that are trying to knock out their colleagues. I did talk to Gaetz about why he's doing this and why he's targeting Congressman Gonzalez. So why Tony Gonzalez?
I cannot save the country with the current Congress we have. We're going to need new members and better members. I would love nothing more than to just go after Democrats. But if Republicans are going to dress up like Democrats in drag, I'm going to go after them too. Because at the end of the day, we're not judged by how many Republicans we have in Congress. We're judged on whether or not we save the country.
I mean, so much is a fight about tactics and how to achieve their objectives, no compromise versus some incremental progress. But Gaetz obviously enjoys stirring the pot.
Absolutely. Not surprising. I have to say, it is a question about governing, right? And how it's defined by House Republicans. You have this more pragmatic wing who is willing to compromise among Republicans and sometimes with Democrats. And then you have that MAGA wing who just wants to keep pushing policies further and the way that they like to see it. So they're both arguing, I need my kind of Republican to make up the House Republican Conference so that we can pass whatever kind of legislation each group thinks is best. And that's why we're seeing a lot of far-right members trying to oust more of those compromising Republicans, if you want to call them that way, like Tony Gonzalez, who did back gun reform because he represents Uvalde. But we're also now seeing more of those pragmatic Republicans. The Main Street Partnership, it represents this Main Street Caucus, one of the 5 ideological families in the conference, also start to go after Freedom Caucus Chair Bob Good, because they want more, quote unquote, governing Republicans to make up the conference. Yeah,
and that's one of the 4 Republicans who actually, according to Bob Good, we have the people who are attending a fundraiser for Bob Good's challenger. There's several of these conservative members, some more moderate members, some more establishment members, people who are aligned with the leadership, trying to oust the leader of the Freedom Caucus, that hard right bloc. But just getting back to Texas, because I think one of the things that's revealing about all this, as you alluded to here, is the issue of compromise and how that creates problems in primaries. Tony Gonzalez represents Uvalde. He voted for this change in gun laws in the last Congress. Also, he voted to codify same-sex marriage. That has caused him some problems on the right as well. I asked him if he stood by those 2 votes. Those votes, though, you stand by those 2 votes?
Of course. Yeah, look, what happened in Uvalde should have never happened. Not because he was 18 years old, not because it was an AR, because he was crazy, right? So crazy people should not have access to kill innocent people. I'm a father of 6. Whatever gay is, I'm about as far away from that as possible. But I've served with all different kinds of people in the military, you name it. And I look at the merit of an individual.
But look, runoffs are very difficult, especially when you're facing people who are trying to go to the right of you. In a low turnout election, he could be in trouble.
Yeah, and the gun vote, I think, especially is an issue here. We're seeing a situation in which, with these members coming out against Tony Gonzalez, targeting him for these kinds of votes, we're already seeing the Republican Party kind of coalesce around a vision that is Donald Trump's. We're going to see less and less of votes like that. So this is a guy who comes from a district that had a very localized experience on this issue, and he voted according to the district. What we're seeing from Gaetz and others is they're basically trying to push him into a different direction, vote more along the party lines, not kind of step outside of the norm of your party. And it's going to be really interesting to see whether he can survive in a primary.
Yeah, and look, this is not just Gaetz. There are others as well. Congressman Ralph Norman targeting a fellow South Carolina Republican, Will Timmons, and other House Freedom Caucus members also going after the sitting congressman.
As I told him, I think to change this place, we have to make some drastic changes. We're losing our country. We're going bankrupt. He just hadn't taken a leadership role, in my opinion. And we've got a man now that heading the Freedom Caucus in South Carolina. He will fight for freedom, and he will be one of us.
He will be one of us. That's what he said about this challenger. Now, I spent last week also talking to a lot of Republicans about all this inter-party warfare, and it just speaks to just the low morale within the House Republican Conference right now.
It is depressing when you have your own team turning on each other because you don't win when that happens. Teams win. And we've undermined the norms of what we've had going back really a couple centuries, frankly. Now we're campaigning in each other's districts. That undermines the team. So I think it's wrong.
We're not going to get much involved in their stuff. They shouldn't get involved in ours.
That's not a healthy situation when you start targeting other members, and especially when the Republican conference does it. Can't do that.
I mean, how you cover the White House. How did they view all this GOP on GOP infighting?
Well, they have to be a little careful here because it does undermine governing, which is what they want. They want to see legislation pass, and this stops or at least creates a massive hurdle for them to do that. But then they can also use it to their advantage. We saw that so clearly with the Senate border bill that the House Republicans wouldn't take up. Now that had been reached through bipartisan compromise, and including with the help of White House and administration officials, and then it was completely tanked. And so now you hear the president using that on the campaign trail to say, look, House Republicans don't want to work with us. They're not doing their job. But then within the White House, they want them to do their job so that they can make sure that the government is funded, so they can try to get other legislation passed. They can also tout on the campaign trail. So it's all pretty delicate, but if anything, in an election year, it does help them boost their campaign messaging by saying House Republicans are so tied up amongst themselves that they can't get anything done, and Democrats can.
Yeah, look, a lot of these districts that there's infighting, the incumbents are endorsing against other incumbents. These are not terribly competitive districts, so it's not like getting a more extreme candidate through the primary is going to cost the party in the general election. But on the margins, the fact that the conference is going after each other like this, it's not the only example of this kind of infighting. We're seeing rules fail on the floor. We're seeing measures supported by the speaker fail on the floor. They have a very close House majority heading into the 2024 election. Even on the margins, hurting them in a few of these districts potentially could matter greatly.
Yeah, and the makeup of the members does matter, especially
Yes.
as we've seen in a narrow majority. Do people want to compromise, not compromise? We've seen a lot of it not compromise.